What I love to do is introduce the right people to the right people.
I assemble the smartest people I can think of or reach out to carry that conversation, and that's exactly what I've done today.
Please give my panel a round of applause. Welcome.
Hey guys, Jay Martin here, CEO of Cambridge House, and I'm joined right now by Dave Collum, professor of organic chemistry at Cornell, but also a familiar face to my audience because, Dave, you do a lot of my peers' shows. I've seen you in a number of podcasts and similar programs. So thanks for making the time and coming on. I'm excited to chat with you.
It's my pleasure.
Now, for anybody who's not familiar, my audience who hasn't heard from you before, can you give us a breakdown, Dave, of who you are and what you spend your time doing?
Well, so I'm an organic chemist. I was a genetics major as an undergrad, recognizing the field was dead. I moved on. I became an organic chemist. Then somewhere in the mid 90s, I got interested in markets again. As a kid, we used to talk macro at the dinner table, and but I didn't know squat. And then I started paying attention, started digging in, and then in '98, I got nervous. I'd pieced together the model that the markets had sort of overstayed their welcome, and by mid '99, I had exited the markets, and for reasons that are hard to reconstruct, I got into gold and silver, and so I had a pretty big gold silver position from '99 on. I also was in energy for about 15 of those years, which meant I did phenomenally and then got beaten up a bit. Ironically, I got saved by a policy change at Cornell's retirement system where they booted me out of my energy funds on the downslope. And I didn't even know it because I didn't pay attention. I knew what my positions were, but I didn't notice they booted me for quite a while. So they saved me more downslope.
Sure.
And then I've been repositioning. I've been going back into energy just recently. It feels like a market top generally, so it feels risky as hell, but it feels like the dollar's just going to keep getting the crap kicked out of it. And so I've got to find some way to hedge against that. And so I'm trolling for ideas that don't feel like they'll get crushed in a secular bear market.
Right. Okay. Well, I want to dive into what some of those ideas might be. And yeah, to back up, listening to a few of your podcasts, I think you said you were encouraged by a peer to jump into the market after the 87 crash. People were running away, right?
Right.
And somebody in your network said, now's the time to jump in. And that led you to the tech bubble, which...
Yeah, and I was a tech bull.
Okay.
I mean, I was a believer. And so I had Dell and WorldCom and all sorts of tech companies. I had plus 100% years. And I got out of WorldCom with like a 700% gain, and I got out of Dell with the same, and I had other positions. So the late 90s were great. And when I got out, I had to watch them keep going for a number of months, thinking I was nuts. But then eventually the tank appeared, and the gold finally started to go up. It's painful to own gold from '99 to 2001 and not have equities from during that window.
Yeah.
But I've also realized once you go bearish, once you see the flaws in the market, it's very hard to go back. And I don't think it's just because your brain rewires and somehow you're stuck. I think once you start doing valuation analyses of the market, we've been above historical valuations since '95. The Fed has somehow managed to just elevate the hell out of it. Maybe it's democratization of the stock market or something, but the markets have been climbing against valuation restraint ever since. And I think we're in a monstrous bubble, and we could be in a 2x monstrous bubble 5 years from now, for all I know. But it's not a game I can play comfortably.
Yeah, that was my question there is, do you have any reason to believe that wouldn't continue when you look at like any 10, 20% dip is going to be quote unquote rescued by the Fed, but you don't have enough confidence to have skin in that game. Am I reading that right? No.
Yeah, right. The problem you face is never in history has it worked. So you're making a guess based on unprecedented thesis that valuations can go to the sky and then just sit there. And I did an analysis last year that I thought was pretty compelling. I might have been the only one, where I looked at what happens when the markets depart 2x from historical valuation. So I drew a curve that showed 2% GDP growth, which is about the path we're on. Ignoring COVID, that's the path we've been on for the better part of a decade. And that's the path of the 20th century, actually. And when you depart 2x, you got some choices if you want to regress to the mean. One is straight down, 50%. The other is straight across, just tread water, seeming interminably. It turns out that takes 35 years. If you look at 2% GDP growth, how long it takes for the GDP to catch the markets. You can do a combo platter where it goes down and burns the clock, which is usually what happens. And I think if it dropped net 16% inflation adjusted over 25 years, the GDP curve would then collide with equities again. Or if you do what the Fed seems to want to achieve, I have nothing but bad things to say about the Fed, but if the Fed is trying to achieve something, I think they're trying to cause the markets to gradually drift up nominally, but maybe less so than the GDP, and eventually have the two meet. And if you get a 20% return and have the two curves recollide again after 50 years. And what the conclusion is that once you're 2x overvalued, there's no safe way home. There's just no way to get out of that. And which means you have to either just keep getting more overvalued. That's a Ponzi scheme, right?
Right.
So there's no way out. There's no safe route. There's no idea that, well, the Fed will print us out. Well, that's inflation. That's so good, right? So, I can't go in the general market at all now. If they keep sending it up, I'm just going to sit in cash or sit in gold or sit in something else. It's not going to be equities.
That's what I was wondering. If you could talk your book a little bit, how are you positioned right now?
I'm positioned probably 30% gold and silver and a few equities. And I didn't like equities for a long time. The gold, I had some through that bull market, but
you talking gold equities?
Gold equities, yeah, gold and silver equities. Because when gold went from 256 up to 1900 and then sort of settled in around 1200, the equities gave it all back. And I'm going, what kind of crazy is this, right? The gold went up a factor of, it's well over a factor of 4. Yet the equities gave it all back. I said, these clowns don't know how to make money. And so I'd lost and never really had faith in the mining management.
Sure.
If you don't know how to make money out of mining, get out of the business, take up, grocery business or something. But they didn't. And so then I'd hear guys I trust talk about how cheap gold equities were, but I'd look it up and they'd have no cash flow. They'd still be no earnings. I go, this is not cheap. And you'd hear about reserves. I live on a lake. Do I own all the fish in that lake? No, right? Could I be a fishery? No, I got to be able to get the fish out of the lake and make some money. So I had no interest in any sort of investment that couldn't generate real cash flow. So then one day I'm listening to Fred Hickey get interviewed, and Fred starts rattling off what some of the gold equities were now doing. And I realized that they had made progress while I was ignoring them. And this was last fall.
Okay.
And all of a sudden you start looking at gold equities, you go, boy, they kind of look like tobacco stocks now, right? They have low valuations, they have real cash flow, they have dividends, no one gives a damn about them. And so I'm going, this looks like a real value play, not some optionality on the precious metal. I never want optionality on anything. I want the damn money. And so I started buying some and I pick it up here and there. So I did a podcast the other day with the Wall Street silver guys who are trying to squeeze silver. And they say, by the way, that silver squeeze didn't fail. They said it's just quietly occurring. So I'm pretty optimistic about silver. But I picked up fragments here and there. So I bought Fidelity's gold fund. That's easy. I'm starting to buy it. My positions are not big. I buy like the equivalent of, at a time when I buy something, usually it's about 10% of an annual salary. I go, boom, hit it. And then I sit there and ponder, go, okay, how'd that work? And how do I feel about it? And sometimes I pick up news stories. I go, okay, that was a bad idea. Don't buy anymore. And someone mentioned in some passing said, what about Jaguar Mining? And Fleckenstein said, I don't know, but it's dirt cheap. And I looked it up. It's unbelievably cheap. It is like Philip Morris was right before the lawsuit. So they're sitting at a PE of 5. They've got net cash on the balance sheet. They're paying a 5.5% dividend. They've got some political risk in Brazil. And I said, holy cow, I'm buying that. I've been telling people you ought to take a peek. And then someone says, oh, by the way, 2 people independently. One said Eric Sprott owns half of it. And I go, that's a good sign. The other thing is someone said, oh, yeah, Jim Grant mentioned it 6 months ago. Now I'm behind in some of my reading. Somehow I missed it. Maybe I was back in the I don't care about optionality phase of my existence. And he mentioned Jaguar Mining and I didn't care.
Yeah.
But that was good to hear. And so, Kinross Mining looks good. I bought some Kirkland Lake. I'm taking cues off the guys who I do trust to get this right. And the companies are recommending that used to be tremendous potential are now actually printing money. They're actually making money. So I'm starting to do that. I bought some Rio Tinto, right? This is just, low valuation, 4.5% dividend. Sure. Why not, right? Now, my opinion is we get a secular bear market of the kind that's going to destroy lives, which I think it will. I really just have no faith that this Fed has our back promise. It's the dumbest bubble in history, in my opinion. Every other bubble, I can tell you why it was a bubble and why people believed and what they were going on. I can understand the Bitcoin bubble. I can understand all sorts of things. But the equity bubble makes no sense because the entire story of the equity bubble is the Fed won't let us be hurt by it.
Right.
And that just seems like an insane story. The tech bubble, great. The 29 bubble, things were marvelous in 29, right? The Japanese were going to own the world. These are all great stories. The Fed's not going to let us get hurt. That's the story. So I view the Fed as a bunch of incompetence. And at some point when they have to, they're going to let us get hurt.
Who is the author of that story, Dave? When you describe that narrative?
Probably sell-side analysts on Wall Street and the Fed. Well, the Fed certainly does it. There's 2 tenets of capitalism which are pretty fundamental. One is the most important asset of them all is capital itself, right? So where the borrowers and lenders meet and haggle over the price of capital. You can't get more central than that to capitalism. The second is the process, the price discovery. And somehow the Federal Reserve has decided that they're in charge of the price of capital. These are morons. These are either morons or liars or delusional. I don't know what to call them, but where in their training did someone tell them that a committee of 12 people, 12 mid-level bureaucrats, decide that they should, as a committee, set the price of capital without using market pricing?
Right.
I think they're just idiots. And I guess they're probably trying to prevent things from happening on their watch. I'm not going to forget it's their fault.
Sure.
So JPO can retire. I'm going to be hammering him all the way to the grave, just like Greenspan.
Yeah.
And just like Yellen and just like Bernanke. Bernanke's 800 SAT doesn't buy him a cup of coffee at Starbucks in my book.
Sure.
So that's my view of the Federal Reserve. And I think they're going to hurt us badly before this is over.
It's interesting to hear you talk about that because that's something I often wonder. And I don't know, I make the assumption, correct or not, that they're intelligent individuals, right? I mean, you would think, right? They understand basic economics, et cetera, but the actions and the words tell you a different story. So if I were to ask you, are they idiots or are they liars? Spinning a narrative. Yeah, exactly. Which would make more sense, right?
I think so. One time Greenspan was quoted saying something like, we can see what you guys can see. And it was kind of this, wink, wink, nod, nod statement.
Right.
And you've got to assume that's true, but that makes them inveterate liars. It means that they're about as honest as the CIA and the DOJ and all the various three-letter organizations that most of us don't trust anymore.
Sure.
And so I think they're lying there. There's this thesis, by the way, that you inflate away debt. According to Rogoff, he said you can inflate it away as long as it's an unexpected inflation. And once the people start responding to it, then the inflating away doesn't work anymore. Well, we're responding to it. Society is responding to it. The other thing is, if you look at the inflation that seems to be on the horizon, it's roaring. It's not, month over month, we hit 7% last month. That's nuts. And Powell says it's transitory and it doesn't bother him. Well, that tells me he's an idiot or a liar again, right? 7%. Volcker said 2 was way too high. He said the crap that they teach you in MBA programs that tells you 2% inflation is okay, it's just garbage. Volcker was very explicit on that. And so then the question becomes, why are they saying it? And I think it's because they want to keep doing what they're doing and know they can't if they ever got honest with us. Because people would say, well, then why are you doing this? And I think at some point we're going to have our come to Jesus moment. And it's going to be unbelievably destructive this time. I think it's going to make 0809 look tame by comparison.
You think so? Okay, so let's talk about that come to Jesus moment a little bit, because we've got a setup right now where, essentially the global economy of the developed nations is being floated right now by stimulus. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of zombie companies, right? I think there's a good argument for whether a global or at least North American coast to coast insolvency crisis, small to medium business enterprises, right? What are your thoughts there, Dave? Is that real, or do you think there's a vaccine-led recovery that's going to sort of band-aid all of this? I think
the vaccine-led recovery is total garbage.
All right. Okay.
I think it's total garbage. The reason I think it's total garbage is because we didn't just lose 10 million jobs. Let's use a round number, 10 million. We didn't just lose 10 million jobs like you lay off Ford Motor workers during a downturn, and then when it turns up again, you hire them back. We destroyed them. So we have 10 million people whose jobs are gone. They're not going to go back to them when the vaccine's over because their businesses have been destroyed. Very, very middle class focused destruction.
Yeah.
The corporations did fine because they had access to zero cost capital, and they could just batten down the hatches, lie to their investors about how they're doing, and move forward. And so we've corporatized everything. And I'm a right winger, but that's bad news because the growth doesn't come from big companies. Mm-hmm. The growth comes from small companies. And so the zombie companies, for those who don't know, 20% of the S&P 500 can't pay off their debt payments with their cash flow. These are the 500 biggest companies in the world. That means 100 of the 500 biggest can't pay their debt payments with their cash flow, with their debt payments at interest rates that are at 5,000-year lows.
Yeah, right.
And so it turns out that if you dial back the clock, this is a fascinating stat. If you go back to the mid-90s, when interest rates were way higher, only 2% of the S&P were zombies.
Well, like 10%?
Yeah, 9% is 9%. The number I remember from having looked at it. So 9% interest rates, 2% zombies. Now we have 0% interest rates essentially, right? Operationally, and 20% zombies. How do those zombies ever become non-zombies again? And then you look at the leverage in the system. If we're trying to inflate away our debt, we're doing a terrible job because the debt. Oh my God, here's one for you. And I don't even know how to think about this. The margin debt, which I get the creeps saying that because I don't think we have any idea where the leverage is buried. So I think leverage is way, way, way more complicated than just adding up bank accounts which people have loans. But the margin debt has grown since 95, which is a 25-year period, has grown at 11.5% a year compounded. So that's a massive growth in at least one metric of leverage.
Right.
Now, is that because the system has fundamentally changed over 25 years? Or does that mean we are fundamentally that far out over our skis I'd still call that over the ski lodge. You're so far out over your skis. And I just don't know. That looks like a mean regressing thing to me. Now, if you correct for inflation, okay, let's call it 8% growth. That's still 8% real growth in margin. This sounds like a chapter of a textbook from the year 2040, where they're talking about the big disaster, the battle of the bastards, whatever it was that happened to us because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how often you mentioned regressing to the mean. And I think it's important because it puts cycles in perspective. And if you look at the US equities market, you can forgive people for assuming that the Fed has your back or that this will continue, because what are we, 12, 13 years now? So for most investors, under the age of 40, 50, all they've known is that the market goes up. And every once in a while,
well, actually, you could argue even the boomers only know that now, because the boomers twice now have gotten their butts kicked to be saved by the Fed.
Right.
So I have a definition of a correction. Here's my definition of a correction. A correction is when you get a fundamental change in price with a fundamental change of attitude accompanying it. So if you change the price down, but the attitudes of the investors don't change, you've corrected nothing. March 2000, that was not a correction. It was not even close to a correction. It was the opposite of a correction. The price change didn't stick, and investors' attitudes got worse because they said, oh, shit, we got saved. World's worst pandemic in 100 years. And we shut down everything with total disaster, and the Fed had our backs. How could you not be wildly enthusiastic about the fact that you're protected from high up?
Of course.
Right? Yeah. So then the question then becomes, when did we last actually have a correction? 87 wasn't even a correction. That taught us that the Greenspan has our back. 2000 was a correction. It wasn't even deep. It was just the tech, just the dot-coms. It's been a long, long time since equity managers were playing solitaire at their desks waiting for someone to call them. It's been a long time since what's his name, Laszlo Barini was one of the guys enthusiastic about equities when he was considered a doofus, because no one buys equities, right? So in 81, you couldn't give them away, and you really couldn't give the equities away in 81. I listened to a podcast by someone the other day. Who was it? Who really described in a convincing sort of way how hard to sell equities were in the 80s.
Really?
Oh, yeah. And it was in a way that I hadn't really heard well, but he's talking about, why would you buy an equity which had done poorly, inflation adjusted horrifically since 67. Here's one for you. Here's this. I'm going to scare the shit out of your listeners. If you ask the question, if you buy or own at the market peak, and you ask the question, how long does it take to get not to an inflation-adjusted recovery for the first time, but for the last time? So if you draw a horizontal line across on an inflation-adjusted plot of the Dow, and you say, when was it the last time, for example, in 1929 or 1906 or 1967, when was the last time that you hit that same inflation-adjusted price before permanently lifting off, right? That's a gigantic water trend. It turns out there's about 4 or 5 instances in the inflation-adjusted Dow over the 20th century where that blue line goes across and it dips down, the equity price dips down and touches that blue line from the previous peak, in which the duration was between 40 and 70 years. Now, people don't know that. You go from 1906, it was 75 years before the 1906 price was touched for the last time. 75 years.
Interesting.
All you got during that period was dividends.
Yeah.
Okay. And so your capital gains were zero. 75 years. There's 4 or 5 of them that are 40 to 75 years. Someone wants to email me? Send me an email. I'll send you the plot. It's trivial to do. You can make your own. And then you say, well,
fire that to me, Dave. If we can pull that up,
I will fire it. Yeah, I will fire it up. And you say, well, what were the average dividends in the 20th century? Well, they were around 4%, but they're not 4% now, right? Yeah. And so if the dividends are 4, but they're taxable, and you got fees. The average fee through the 20th century is probably 1.5%.
Yeah.
What did you end up with during those 75 years? You ended up with about a 1 or 2% return. People don't know that the markets can make you suffer for an entire generation when it's finally time to make you suffer.
This generation hasn't experienced that, right? It's so far from our reality.
The Lord is coming, baby. I'm not religious, but there's going to be people praying to God before the next secular bear is over.
It's fine. Well, that's and if and when that occurs, the victims will be, a consequence of paying more attention to the most recent tweet than the 100-year cycle of anything, right? And that's it's that confirmation bias, recency bias that affects everybody, but super prevalent right now. Okay, I do want to pivot a little bit. I wanted to get your thoughts on the market and where, most importantly, what I try to get out of people is where's your cash, right? That's what really matters. And we touched on that. I want to talk to you a little bit about the, I don't know what you want to call it, the state of politics in the US, because I know you have some strong thoughts. So why don't we start? What are the major changes that we'll see in the US under the Biden administration compared to the previous 4 years under Trump?
Okay, so I wrote about the Biden administration that was coming back in December of 2020. And I tried to take the measured response in which I said, look, every new presidency brings in sort of a new view of the world. The people who voted against him think it's the end of history at that point, and that all hell's going to break loose, and it rarely happens, right? So people thought Reagan would destroy the world. He didn't. People thought the Bush would destroy the world. He tried. Younger Bush tried. People thought Obama was going to be the end of it. Obama was fine, in my opinion. And so I wrote about the Harris-Biden administration through that lens. And I said, we can all get upset, but, don't forget all the people who said Trump was going to destroy the world. And we're still here and everything's fine. And you can still hate him if you want, but you'd be hard pressed to point to something and say, that's a truly awful event besides the fact they hate Trump. I am bothered by the fact that this administration was handed, I think, not only the opportunity, but the task of healing us, right? After a polarizing administration, right? They were handed the task and the opportunity to try to pull everything together. And so the obvious move would have been to pivot to the middle and try to say, look, I'm the president from both sides, and here's some and I see nothing. I see nothing of that kind. I see an administration that looks like they are almost panicking with urgency to put into place extreme political events, extreme things, using all the executive orders. The border crisis was certainly Biden's fault for saying, come on in. And now we've got a border crisis. Stacking the Supreme Court, I thought would go away. It's back again. I think that's a thermonuclear threat.
Why do you say that?
Because you're politicizing the one body that I think still may be fairly pure.
Okay.
So if you take 9 people, you get too big, it becomes a democracy, not even a panel of judges, right? It becomes a voting body. And so I think saying that because there's not enough of my team on the court, we're going to change the rules. That's troubling as hell to me. And I actually favor a left-leaning court. So I boomers tend to have sort of mixed political stances. I guess everyone does, maybe. So I kind of support, American civil liberties battles when it doesn't look logical sometimes. And I support a sort of a left slanted court. Okay. But I'm not troubled by the current court. It doesn't bother me. But the changing of the rules and packing the court to get more lefties in there, that bothers me. So I'm not sure who's calling the shots. I don't think it's Biden. I don't think it's Harris. I don't know who's writing the executive orders. If you look at Biden's administration, let me put it in delicate terms, it doesn't look like he used merit as a guide to picking his concentric circles of influence. He looks like he was checking social boxes to me.
Okay.
And there's qualified people all over the place, but I think you go for merit. And you can certainly say, make sure merit doesn't include just a bunch of white guys, but it looks like he's playing bingo or something. And so I'm troubled by all of that. So I think Biden, I think the radical left has a hold of the Biden administration somehow, and I don't know how. Meanwhile, he brought a bunch of neocons in who, to me, are way more dangerous. So the people who love to create border wars in various faraway lands and stuff, those guys I really detest. We got to stop bombing people, things like that. And I have no faith that the Biden administration will be able to avoid that. They look. So I'm not very optimistic. I was willing to be optimistic in December when I wrote about him, but I'm getting pretty discouraged very, very fast.
Interesting. You know what? I appreciate how you speak positively about both Trump and Obama. It just gives us context, right? That we're not hearing an extreme bias. And, pulling on that thread, actually, I have a question for you, Dave. What is the next we will hear about Donald Trump? Is it Trump media? What's the next platform? What do you think his next move is?
My guess is that he's going to exit politics. My guess is he's right now, I think he's hanging around to stick it in the eye of his opponents just to drive them crazy. So he's kind of teasing them and stuff. The next thing you might hear about Trump might be a different Trump.
You think so?
Right? So at the end of the 1 year, I wrote about how, in Star Wars, where they said at one point, he says there is another, right, hinting that there was another, beyond Luke, right, I kind of hinted at that, and I said, 2036 Clinton versus Trump. I think that's Chelsea versus Ivanka, one of the two.
Okay.
I think Donald Trump Jr. it looks like he's got the piss and vinegar to try to stay in the limelight, and so he's not going to go away. I think Donald, though, I think he'll move on. I think he'll find something to do with himself that'll be every bit as wacky as TV shows.
Okay, I'm with you. Okay, now I want to ask you a question, point blank. I'm quoting you. Correct me if I've bastardized this, but I've heard you say China owns Biden, and I would love for you to expand on that if I've not misquoted you. What that means.
Well, even if you've misquoted me, you've captured the spirit of my thinking.
Okay. So
I'm profoundly troubled by the media letting us down. So I think the media is horrifically bad now. And my team includes Glenn Greenwald. There's a lot of people going, we are in an awful situation because the media used to challenge power and now they've been commandeered by it. So you don't get straight story. The Biden laptop, in my opinion, was real. I have very little doubt. I'd comfortably bet a lot of money that it's real. There's a lot of prominent people who said, yes, it's real. There are potential, it was played funny in the election. There's potential reasons why that I can think of that they kind of teased us with it, but they didn't release it, right? They released tiny shards of this and that, and you go, why? So I don't think it was about the election. I think it was some sort of blackmail chip. Might have been Trump's family saying, don't go at us after the election if you win because we got the laptop, right? Could have been the DNC saying, okay, Joe, we own you, but I think they already did. Could have been the Republicans saying, behave yourself. This is a two-party system and we've got the laptop. And then my fourth thought was China, but China not only has the laptop, but China created the laptop. And so Hunter was traveling around China and cutting deals and these stories are true. China knows everything, every conversation, everything that's ever happened in China by a prominent person, China has. And so we went from an administration which the president appeared to be willing to battle China to say, look, you're not going to push us around. We're going to try to cut better deals, which I think was correct. Forget about how he did it. Maybe that was wrong, but he tried. Biden, to the extent that they have blackmail material over him, means we got nothing to defend us in any sort of tough negotiation with China.
Right.
And there's a video that I saw that was so troubling. And it was a video of one of Xi Jinping's right-hand men, who's an academic, but apparently still in the inner circle, who stands up in front of an audience post-election, he says, we have, this is in Chinese, but it was subtitled. People said, how do you know the subtitles are real? And I go, because there's 50 guys in my department who could translate for me if not me. So I don't think you'd fake subtitles. That becomes a meme. And so he says, we've had control of the upper echelon of American politics for many years. I'm going, whoa. Why did he just say that? He said it in a public forum. Who's the target audience for that statement? So then he goes on and he says, if we need something, we hand out a wad of cash. And the audience laughs. And he says, and if that doesn't work, we hand out another wad of cash. And the audience laughs again. And then he says, and then Trump got elected and we lost control. And he says, we had high positioned insiders. We told them to get control, and they said they did not have the power to control him. So he's describing this horrific story. And then he gets to the end and he says, now Biden's in power and we're okay again. And the audience laughs.
And do you attribute that strictly to the leverage of something like this laptop scenario? Because it just seems kind of petty, right? If you're the Democratic Party and that's the liability.
Well, don't forget, through the whole campaign, Biden was saying China's our buddy, China's our friend, they're not our enemy. He played a very, very pro-China policy. And don't forget, a lot of our trade deals with China date all the way back to Nixon and Mao and these guys, and in which they were set up to give China great benefits to come out open to the world. And these never got undone. And so there's been highway robbery of, trade secrets, and there's all sorts of things that have gone on. And it is time that balance of power get sort of jiggered back into place. And I think that Biden is completely and utterly ill-equipped to do this because of being compromised, because of his attitude. If the election was rigged, then certainly I think China was involved. And there's trails that lead to China in the election rigging story that, a lot of people think you're nuts for believing it. There's some amazing connectivities out there if you're willing to dig and not watch CNN and Fox News.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
And so China wanted Biden and they're not Trump. And I think they own him. And so I think from here on out, our negotiations with China are highly compromised.
Okay. Well, let me ask you this. The end of 4 years, is Biden still the president?
Knock me over with a feather. No, I think he won't be. I think he's going to have a stroke or something like the movie Dave. And Kamala Harris will be the puppet put into place. I don't think she's running it either. Let me tell me this isn't surreal. If you go back to the Iowa caucuses, back when the Democratic Party was still like 13 people trying to get into the White House, and there on the stage was Kamala Harris and Biden. Biden was on the far left, which meant he wasn't even a player. He was the old man there to pretend like there was adult supervision or something, right? Kamala Harris was there. Tulsi Gabbard beat the living snot out of Kamala Harris with a 2-minute fusillade of attacks. The next day or 2 days later, Kamala dropped. She got exactly the same number of delegates that I got, and that the postman who delivers my mail got 0. So now the question is, if you were on a betting parlor, some online betting parlor, what would be the odds makers pay line for a Biden-Harris administration? It would have been 1,000 to 1. They were the two weakest looking candidates on that stage. And we end up with that. How is that possible? How is that possible? And I just don't know. I'm paranoid at this point. I admittedly maybe schizophrenic, but I don't think anything is happening by chance anymore. I think we have a crisis of authority. I put on Twitter the other day, what 3-letter organization do you trust? And you go, CIA, no. FBI, no. DOJ, no. CDC, no. You keep going down the line, and finally someone came up with an answer. They said KFC, and I go, okay, KFC. And so we've got a crisis. No one trusts anyone. I think Fauci's a pathological liar. I think the whole COVID story is founded on a disease that's real, but so much of the plot line is fabricated.
Sure.
But I'm not even sure which parts I've got right and which parts I don't. But I do know that if their lips are moving, they're probably lying. And I think I'm not alone. And
yeah,
so
I think you're not alone. Yeah, it's okay. So I'll get closer to wrapping up because I think I told you 25 minutes, and we're probably closing in on an hour, Dave. But you're not alone, right? However, there's a very hard line in the sand between what people believe and what these people believe, specifically in the U.S. right now, the U.S. unrest, the civil unrest in the U.S. And keep in mind, I'm Canadian. I'm just an outsider looking in. But what I see is this progression, right? And you dial it back to like 2010, there was the Occupy Wall Street movements. And in the moment, that was extreme.
It was a beta test.
Sure.
That was the first shot across the bow.
Yeah. And it seemed extreme at the time, right? Fast forward to 2016, candidates like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump emerge, like the evolution of these ideas to 2020. And you have these quasi-extremist groups like Antifa and QAnon, et cetera. Like given this trajectory, what happens next, Dave? What do you see?
Well, and it's even, it looks to me like they're trying to stir up a meme about anti-Asian hatred, which I don't think is real. I think you've got Asian communities budding up or embedded in impoverished neighborhoods where crime's high. So you can find footage of Asians getting beaten up and Korean grocery store owners getting robbed and stuff like that. But now they're creating white supremacy driven Asian hatred story, which I think is just crap. I think it's just total crap. So then the question is, are we just getting given narratives over and over and over to keep us on the edge of our seats and to keep us battling? That's my current thesis.
That wouldn't be new.
That they are keeping us fighting so that we're not paying attention to what they're actually doing. You got the World Economic Forum proposing crazy shit. The mass debate is causing, families to bust apart. It seems like CNN, that technical director got caught on tape saying that, the COVID is not going to last much longer. And so they're going to turn to climate change. And they're going to start humping climate change, which will last for many years. And then it turns out Obama's chief scientific advisor just came out and said climate change is crap, which is my view. And so the climate change narrative is to get us to all let huge money flow into highly lobbied up organizations to pump money into Tesla, into solar panel makers, and into organizations and this guy came out, this guy named Stephen Kuhn, came out and said, if you read the climate reports by the scientists, they do not in any way say what we're being told they say. And he quoted some of them, and they're extraordinary. It's like stuff I wrote. 2019, I spent 25 pages writing about the climate narrative. And I started out thinking it was real, and I ended up thinking it was just a total load of crap. I'm having a call with a Stanford psychologist who's a narrative expert. I think it's next week, in which he went down the same rabbit hole and came to the same conclusion. The difference between he and I is he's a narrative expert. He's a media expert. And he knows what the media does to convey narratives. And he concluded that climate change was largely a pile of biomass. And so it's going to be a fun phone call. I'm dying to find out his path to that. I think the climate change story is total crap. I believe we're polluting. I believe microplastics. I believe we're depleting resources. I do not believe CO2 is our enemy.
Okay.
Period. And I did a lot of work to get there.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Now look, okay, I'll wrap it up here. And I think, to recap, if there's been one consistent theme through this, it's been just like a healthy dose of distrust, but in the sense of like retaining a sovereign mindset, which
Right.
is just so vitally important for all of us right now, and something that I stand by. Think for yourself. Look, Dave, I really appreciate your time. It was great having you on, and about time that we did this. I've been watching a lot of your content and was looking forward to having you on the show. So I appreciate you making the time.